The moment Zoe Mitchell set foot in the high school gymnasium, a wave of nostalgia mixed with anxiety washed over her. 15 years had transformed the once intimidating space into something smaller than her memories suggested. Yet the familiar scent of floor polish and the echo of sneakers squeaking against hardwood transported her back to a time of homework, heartbreak, and teenage dreams. "I can't believe I let you talk me into this," Zoe muttered to her best friend Tina, who had practically dragged her to their 15-year high school reunion. "I look ridiculous." "You look gorgeous," Tina countered, adjusting the strap of Zoe's navy blue cocktail dress. "And you know it." "Now come on, let's get a drink before I die of thirst." The gym had been transformed with twinkling lights, round tables draped in white linens, and a temporary wooden dance floor. A banner hung overhead. "Westlake High School, class of 2008, where are they now?" The irony wasn't lost on Zoe at 33. She was still trying to figure that out for herself. After her divorce 2 years ago, Zoe had thrown herself into rebuilding her life. She'd launched a small but growing interior design business, bought a cozy house in the suburbs, and had just started feeling like herself again. The last thing she wanted was to parade her uncertain present before people who knew her past. As Tina led her toward the bar, Zoe scanned the room. She recognized most faces, though time had added lines around eyes and silver threads among hair colors. Near the corner, a quiet figure stood alone, nursing a drink. There was something familiar about him, but Zoe couldn't quite place him. "2 glasses of white wine," Tina ordered at the bar, then turned to Zoe. "So, any exes here you're dreading seeing?" "Just Brandon, but I heard he moved to Seattle," Zoe replied, still distracted by the man in the corner. "Hey, do you recognize that guy over there, by the exit sign?" Tina followed her gaze. Wait, is that Kyle Sinclair, the super quiet math guy?" The name clicked and memories flooded back. Kyle Sinclair had been painfully shy in high school, brilliant at calculus but barely spoke above a whisper. He'd worn thick glasses and kept to himself, though Zoe remembered partnering with him once for a chemistry project. He'd been kind, if awkward. But this Kyle looked different. The glasses were gone, replaced by a confident stance and a tailored suit that subtly whispered expense. His once unruly hair was now stylishly cut, and though he still kept to himself, there was an air of quiet purpose about him rather than adolescent discomfort. "I barely recognize him," Zoe admitted. "Go say hi," Tina nudged her. "You were always nice to him when everyone else thought he was weird." "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. I'm going to find Derek and see if he's still as cute as his Facebook photos suggest." With that, Tina disappeared into the crowd, leaving Zoe clutching her wine glass and feeling suddenly vulnerable. Taking a deep breath, Zoe crossed the room. Up close, she could see Kyle's eyes, a deep, thoughtful blue she'd forgotten. They widened slightly as she approached. "Kyle Sinclair, right?" she asked, extending her hand. Zoe Mitchell, well, it used to be Zoe Henderson back then. His handshake was warm and firm. "Zoe, I remember you. Chemistry lab senior year, you saved our project when I knocked over that beaker of sodium hydroxide." Zoe laughed, surprised he recalled such a detail. "That's right, Mr. Paulson nearly had a heart attack." "You were wearing a yellow sweater," Kyle added, then looked slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, I have a good memory for details." Something fluttered in Zoe's chest, a mixture of flattery and curiosity. "No need to apologize, I'm impressed." She gestured around the gym. "So, what brings you back to the reunion? You never seemed like the type to reminisce about high school glory days." Kyle smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I wasn't. High school wasn't exactly my favorite time, but my mom still lives in town and she insisted I come. Said it would be good for me to reconnect." "Mothers have a way of knowing what's best," Zoe agreed, sipping her wine. "What are you up to these days? Still doing math things?" A flicker of amusement crossed Kyle's face. "You could say that. I work in tech, software development mainly." "Must be doing well," Zoe observed, nodding toward his suit. "That's definitely not off the rack," Kyle shrugged modestly. I've been fortunate, but enough about me. What about you? Interior design, right? I saw your company featured in a magazine recently. Zoe nearly choked on her wine. You saw my work in a magazine, Modern Home and Design, last month. The lakeside cottage renovation, your use of space was remarkable. Heat rose to Zoe's cheeks. Her business was still small, and that feature had been her first major press. I didn't realize anyone actually read those things. I read everything, Kyle said simply. Always have. Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from careers to travels to books they'd loved. Zoe found herself genuinely enjoying Kyle's company, his dry humor, his attentive listening, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts without interrupting or dominating the conversation. As they talked, classmates occasionally approached, usually with surprised expressions at seeing Kyle. Each time he was polite but brief, clearly preferring his conversation with Zoe. She noticed how their former classmates regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and something like deference, but Kyle seemed either unaware or unbothered. An hour passed before Tina reappeared, giving Zoe a not-so-subtle thumbs-up behind Kyle's back. "Kyle, it was great seeing you," Tina said. "I hear you're some kind of big shot in Silicon Valley now," Kyle smiled politely. "Just trying to create useful things." "He's being modest," said Derek, who had joined Tina. "Sinclair Technologies is revolutionizing quantum computing. My brother works in tech and says Kyle is the next Elon Musk, minus the Twitter meltdowns." Zoe blinked, looking between Derek and Kyle. "Sinclair Technologies, that's yours?" Kyle nodded almost apologetically. "I started it about 10 years ago. We've grown quite a bit." "Quite a bit." Derek laughed. "Dude's a billionaire, Zoe. Forbes list and everything." A strange silence fell over their small group. Zoe felt heat rise to her face again, but for entirely different reasons. She'd been chatting with Kyle as if he were just another classmate, not one of the wealthiest people in the country. "I should get some air," Kyle said suddenly, looking uncomfortable with the attention. He glanced at Zoe. "Would you like to join me?" Without waiting for Tina's meaningful look, Zoe nodded. "I'd like that." They slipped out a side door into the cool night air. The school's football field stretched before them, silver under moonlight. Kyle loosened his tie slightly, looking more relaxed away from the crowd. "Sorry about that," he said. "I don't usually advertise my financial situation." Zoe studied him. "Is that why you didn't mention it when I asked what you do?" "Partly," Kyle admitted, leaning against the railing. "People tend to act differently when they know. And partly because it's not the most interesting thing about me, contrary to what people like Derek think." "What is the most interesting thing about you then?" Zoe asked, genuinely curious. Kyle thought for a moment. "Probably that I still can't whistle despite countless tutorials and years of practice." Zoe burst out laughing, the tension broken. "That is interesting and slightly tragic." "Your turn," Kyle said, eyes twinkling. "Most interesting thing about you." "I can name all 50 states in alphabetical order in under 30 seconds, Zoe replied without hesitation. "Prove it." Zoe launched into her recitation, speaking rapidly but clearly as Kyle timed her on his watch. When she finished with Wyoming at 28 seconds, he looked genuinely impressed. "That's much more interesting than being on some magazine list," he said, and Zoe felt he truly meant it. They walked the perimeter of the football field, trading stories and observations. Kyle told her about his travels hiking in New Zealand, getting lost in Tokyo, a mishap with a rental car in Iceland. Zoe shared her struggles and triumphs with her business, how she'd rebuilt after her divorce, her dream of designing a boutique hotel someday. "Why did you really come back?" Zoe asked as they completed their loop. "I can't imagine our reunion was that compelling for someone with your life." Kyle was quiet for a moment. "Unfinished business, maybe," he finally said. "High school was difficult for me. I thought coming back might help me close that chapter properly." "And has it?" He looked at her, moonlight reflecting in his eyes. "It's certainly not what I expected." Back inside, the reunion was in full swing. The DJ had switched to nostalgic hits from their teenage years, and the dance floor was packed. Tina shot Zoe an inquisitive look from across the room, but Zoe gave a small shake of her head, a signal they'd developed over years of friendship. "I'm good, talk later." "Dance?" Kyle asked unexpectedly, gesturing toward the floor. Zoe raised an eyebrow. The Kyle Sinclair I remember avoided school dances like they were contagious diseases. "The Kyle Sinclair you remember couldn't even look at you without turning red," he replied with surprising candor. "I've grown up a bit since then." The implication hung between them. Had he had feelings for her back then? Before she could analyze it further, Zoe found herself being led gently to the dance floor as the opening notes of "Chasing Cars" by Snow Patrol filled the gymnasium. Kyle was a good dancer, not flashy but confident, leading without controlling. As they swayed to the music that had once been the soundtrack to their youth, Zoe felt an unexpected connection forming, a bridge between their past selves and who they'd become. "I had such a crush on you senior year," Kyle said quietly, confirming her suspicion. "You were the only person who saw past the awkward math nerd." Zoe looked up at him, surprised. "I had no idea." "That was the point," Kyle smiled wryly. "I was terrified you'd find out. And now?" Zoe asked, not entirely sure what she was asking. Kyle's eyes held her steadily. "Now I'm less terrified." The song ended, but they remained on the dance floor as another began. They danced through 3 more songs before Kyle checked his watch reluctantly. "I promised my mom I'd stop by tonight," he explained. "She's probably waiting up." "Of course," Zoe nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "But I'd like to see you again," Kyle added. "I'm in town for a week, maybe dinner tomorrow." Zoe smiled, feeling like a teenager again, but in the best possible way. "I'd like that." They exchanged phone numbers, and Kyle insisted on walking her back to Tina, who was trying and failing to look like she wasn't watching them intently. "I'll call you tomorrow," Kyle promised, and with a gentle squeeze of her hand, he was gone. "Spill everything," Tina demanded the moment he was out of earshot, "and don't leave out a single detail." The next evening, Zoe found herself scrutinizing her reflection with an intensity she hadn't felt in years. She'd changed outfits 3 times, finally settling on a simple emerald green dress that complemented her auburn hair. Kyle had called as promised, suggesting a small Italian restaurant downtown. "Nothing fancy," he'd assured her, though Zoe had done enough research since last night to know that nothing fancy might mean something different to a billionaire. When Kyle's car pulled up, a surprisingly modest Audi rather than the flashy sports car she'd half expected, Zoe took a deep breath and stepped outside before he could come to the door. "You look beautiful," Kyle said simply, as she slid into the passenger seat. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Zoe replied, noting his casual but perfectly tailored navy blazer and crisp white shirt. The restaurant was indeed small and intimate, with only a dozen tables and soft lighting from iron chandeliers. The owner greeted Kyle by name, leading them to a corner table with a good view of both the room and the street outside. "You've been here before?" Zoe asked after they'd ordered. "It's my mother's favorite," Kyle explained. "I take her here whenever I'm in town." "Best risotto outside of Milan," she claims. "Tell me about your mom," Zoe said, genuinely interested. "She still lives in your childhood home?" Kyle nodded, his expression softening. "She's a retired math professor, taught at the community college for 30 years. My dad passed away when I was 12 and she raised me on her own. She's the strongest person I know." "She sounds wonderful," Zoe said. "What does she think of your success?" "She's proud but amusingly unimpressed," Kyle laughed. "When I made my first million," she said, "that's nice, dear, but have you been flossing regularly? When Forbes put me on their list, she called to remind me I still haven't fixed her porch swing." Zoe laughed, charmed by this glimpse into Kyle's life. "Keeping you humble." "Exactly." "What about your family?" Zoe told him about her parents, who had retired to Florida, and her younger brother, who was a firefighter in Chicago. She explained her divorce without bitterness, a marriage that had simply run its course as they grew in different directions. No children. Kyle asked carefully. No, Zoe admitted. We tried for a while, but it wasn't meant to be. That was partly why we drifted apart, different priorities about what came next. Kyle nodded understandingly. And now, what are your priorities? Zoe considered the question. Building something meaningful. My business, yes, but also a life that feels authentic. Connections that matter, she looked at him. What about you? With all you've accomplished, what drives you now? Legacy, I suppose, Kyle said thoughtfully. Not just leaving wealth behind, but creating something that improves lives. And lately? He paused. Lately, I've been thinking more about personal connections. Success means little if you have no one to share it with. Their conversation flowed throughout dinner, interspersed with comfortable silences and shared laughter. Kyle told her about the early days of his company, sleeping on office floors, the first major breakthrough, the terrifying leap of faith when he invested everything in an unproven technology. Zoe shared stories of design disasters, difficult clients, and the satisfaction of transforming spaces. They discovered shared passions for hiking, classic films, and terrible sci-fi novels. When the check arrived, Kyle took it automatically but paused and looked at Zoe. I don't want this to feel unequal. If we're going to spend time together, I want you to be comfortable. Zoe appreciated his sensitivity. Kyle, I'm having dinner with you because I enjoy your company, not because of your bank account, but yes, you can get the check. She smiled playfully. I'll get coffee next time. Next time, Kyle repeated, looking pleased. After dinner, they took a walk through the downtown area, past shops and cafes they'd frequented as teenagers. The town had changed, some businesses gone, new ones in their place, but the essence remained familiar. They stopped outside what had once been the old bookstore, now a trendy clothing boutique. I used to hide in here during lunch periods sometimes, Kyle admitted. Mrs. Blackwell would let me sit in the back corner and read whatever I wanted. I didn't know that, Zoe said softly. There's a lot we didn't know about each other then, Kyle replied. But we have time to learn now if you want. The question hung between them, earnest and hopeful. Zoe found herself nodding. I'd like that. When Kyle dropped her off, he walked her to the door but didn't presume anything further. Instead, he simply took her hand and kissed it gently. I'm having breakfast with my mother tomorrow, but would you like to have dinner again? Or we could do something during the day if you're free. Zoe thought for a moment. How about a hike? There's a trail at Lakeview Park I've been wanting to explore. Kyle's face lit up. Perfect. 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock, she confirmed. Over the next week, they fell into an easy rhythm. Hiking led to a picnic, which led to Kyle helping Zoe with a small design project for a client, which led to dinner at his mother's house, a modest but charming colonial where Zoe was warmly welcomed and gently interrogated. Billionaire Sinclair was exactly as Kyle had described, brilliant, no nonsense, and completely unimpressed by her son's wealth. She treated Zoe like a long-lost friend, showing her Kyle's embarrassing childhood photos and telling stories that made him groan good-naturedly. He was always special, Billionaire told Zoe as they washed dishes together after dinner. Not because of his brain, though that helped, but because of his heart. He sees people, really sees them. I've noticed that, Zoe said, thinking of how attentively Kyle listened, how he remembered details most would overlook. He's been alone too long, Billionaire continued, handing Zoe a plate to dry. Focused on building his empire. I'm glad he found you again. Before Zoe could process this statement, Kyle returned from taking out the trash and the moment passed. But later, as they walked hand in hand under the stars, Zoe found herself thinking about Billionaire's words. Your mother is wonderful, she told Kyle. I see where you get your strength. She likes you, Kyle replied. She doesn't like many people. Should I be flattered or concerned? Zoe teased. Kyle stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression suddenly serious. Zoe, I need to tell you something. Her heart skipped a beat. Okay. I didn't just happen to come to the reunion, he admitted. I knew you would be there. Tina posted about it on the alumni page, and I came back for you. Zoe's eyes widened. What? Kyle ran a hand through his hair, looking more like his teenage self in that moment of vulnerability. I never forgot you. Over the years, I would see your name occasionally, a social media post, that magazine feature, and I'd wonder how you were. When I saw you were coming to the reunion, I thought, maybe it was a chance to see if there could be something there. Zoe was speechless, processing this revelation. I'm sorry if that seems strange, Kyle continued quickly. I wasn't stalking you or anything, I just remembered you, the kindness you showed me when most people didn't bother. So what, this whole week has been some kind of experiment? Zoe asked, trying to understand. No, Kyle said firmly. Once I saw you again, talked with you, this has been completely real. I just wanted to be honest about why I came back. Zoe took a step back, needing space to think. I don't know how to feel about this, Kyle. I understand, he said quietly. Take whatever time you need. They walked back to his car in silence, and the drive to her house was tense. When they arrived, Kyle didn't try to walk her to the door, sensing her need for distance. Zoe, he said as she reached for the door handle. I'm sorry if I overstepped. That wasn't my intention, she paused, looking back at him. I just need to think. This is a lot. Kyle nodded, his disappointment visible but controlled. Of course. Inside her house, Zoe paced the living room, trying to sort through her feelings. Was she upset that Kyle had sought her out? Or was she touched by the gesture? Part of her felt manipulated, but another part recognized the courage it took for him to admit the truth. She called Tina, who answered despite the late hour. He came back for me, Zoe blurted before Tina could speak. Kyle, he saw I was going to be at the reunion and came specifically to see me. Wow, Tina breathed. That's actually incredibly romantic, or creepy, Zoe countered. Did he follow you around with binoculars, send you strange gifts, show up unannounced? No, nothing like that. Then it's romantic, Tina declared. Zoe, the guy remembered you all these years later. Isn't that what everyone dreams of, being unforgettable? Zoe sank onto her couch. When you put it that way. How do you feel about him without this new information? Zoe closed her eyes, thinking of their week together. The easy conversations, the way he looked at her like she was fascinating, the laughter, the comfortable silences. I think I'm falling for him, she admitted softly. Then don't overthink this, Tina advised. He took a chance because he never forgot you. That's not manipulation, that's fate giving you both a nudge. After hanging up, Zoe sat in the quiet of her living room, mulling over Tina's words. Was it really so different from any other reunion encounter? People often attended hoping to reconnect with someone specific, a friend, a crush, even the one who got away. By morning, Zoe had made her decision. She texted Kyle, "Coffee, the cafe on Pine Street in an hour." His reply was immediate. "I'll be there." The cafe was busy with the Saturday morning crowd, but Kyle had secured a corner table. He stood when he saw her, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as she sat down. A cappuccino, her preference, she'd mentioned days ago, waited for her. "I've been thinking about what you told me," Zoe began, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "And I have questions." Kyle nodded. "Anything? Why me? After all these years, with everything you've accomplished and all the people you must have met, why come back for a girl you barely knew in high school?" Kyle considered her question carefully. "Because you were kind when you had no reason to be, because you saw me when I felt invisible. And because in every relationship I've had since, none of which lasted, by the way, I found myself comparing them to a memory, a feeling I had when I was 17. He leaned forward. "I'm not saying I've been pining for you all these years. I've lived my life. But when I saw your name on that alumni page, something clicked and I thought, what if?" Zoe studied him, searching for any sign of insincerity. "And if this week hadn't gone well, if we had nothing in common as adults? Then I would have had a nice visit with my mother and closure on an old chapter," Kyle said simply. "But Zoe, this week has been extraordinary, at least for me." His honesty disarmed her. "For me too," she admitted, relief washed over Kyle's face. "So where do we go from here?" "Forward, I think," Zoe said, reaching across the table to take his hand. but at our own pace. I'm not interested in rushing." "I have all the time in the world," Kyle replied, squeezing her hand gently. The week that followed was bittersweet, knowing Kyle would soon return to California. They made the most of each day exploring the town's hidden gems, working side by side as Kyle helped Zoe with a design project, sharing quiet evenings talking about everything and nothing. On his last night in town, Kyle took Zoe to the lakeside, where a small wooden dock extended over the water. They sat with their feet dangling, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. "I don't want to leave," Kyle confessed, his arm around her shoulders. "Then don't," Zoe said, surprising herself with her boldness. Kyle looked at her, eyebrows raised. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, maybe you could stay a few more days, or I could visit you in California, or we could figure out something in between." Zoe turned to face him fully. "I know it's only been 2 weeks, but I feel something real here, Kyle, something worth exploring." Kyle's face lit up with hope. "I feel it too." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Zoe Mitchell, are you suggesting a long-distance relationship?" "For now," she nodded, "with frequent visits and lots of video calls." "I have a private jet," Kyle reminded her with a small smile. "Frequent visits wouldn't be a problem." Zoe laughed. "I keep forgetting you're actually a billionaire." "Good," Kyle said seriously, "because that's the least interesting thing about me." "I agree," Zoe said, leaning in to kiss him softly. In the months that followed, they navigated their long-distance relationship with determination and creativity. Zoe flew to California to see Kyle's world, his sleek but surprisingly homey penthouse, his company headquarters where employees clearly adored him, the coastal trails he hiked on weekends. Kyle returned to their hometown regularly, helping Zoe's business by connecting her with high-profile clients and investing in her dream of a boutique hotel design. He never tried to control her vision, only supported and enhanced it with his resources. 8 months after the reunion, Kyle proposed on the same dock where they'd decided to give long-distance a chance. The ring was elegant, but not ostentatious. He'd paid attention to Zoe's taste for understated beauty. "I know it hasn't been that long," he said, on one knee before her. "But when you've waited 15 years to find the right person, you don't want to waste any more time." Zoe, tears streaming down her face, said yes without hesitation. They married the following spring in Kyle Sinclair's backyard, surrounded by close friends and family. Tina served as maid of honor, repeatedly taking credit for making Zoe go to that reunion. Rather than a lavish honeymoon, they embarked on a cross-country road trip in a luxury RV, exploring small towns and national parks at their own pace. Kyle worked remotely when needed, and Zoe sketched design inspirations from the changing landscapes. They settled in a compromised location, a beautiful home midway between her established business connections and his company headquarters. Kyle opened a satellite office nearby, allowing him to be present while maintaining his company's California base. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed twins, a boy and a girl who inherited Kyle's thoughtful blue eyes and Zoe's warm smile. Eleanor moved closer to help with the grandchildren, delighting in their development and frequently reminding Kyle that his mathematical genius was nothing compared to the wonder of watching a child learn to walk. On their 5th anniversary, they returned to Westlake High School for another reunion. This time, they arrived together, fingers intertwined, no longer the shy math nerd and the kind girl who saw him, but partners who had built a life neither could have imagined that first night in the gymnasium. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't come to the reunion?" Zoe asked as they stood in the same spot where they'd reconnected. Kyle smiled, pulling her close. "I don't believe in coincidences, Zoe. I think we were always meant to find each other again. I just gave fate a little nudge." "Well, I'm glad you did," Zoe said, reaching up to kiss him, "and I'm even more glad I decided to come that night." "So am I," Kyle whispered against her lips. "So am I."